What's up, everybody? We're back with episode 29 of Sport Vitamins. Today, I have the huge honor to have David Joyce on my show. David is the author of one of my favorite books on sport performance. I'm talking about high performance training for sports. He just released the second edition. I literally can't wait to dive into it. David is also the founder and managing director of Synapsing, and he has trained and rehabilitated world and Olympic champions and has worked for 2 decades in Olympic programs with Great Britain, China, and Australia. He also worked with highly successful teams in elite football, rugby, and Australian football. First of all, I want to give a shout out to Kostas Hatzikristos, who made the connection between me and David. And without further ado, guys, here's the episode with David Joyce. David, welcome on the show.
Ciao, Roberto.
Ciao, David. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on today. David is the author of High Performance Training for Sport. He just came out with the second edition. I'm looking forward to diving into it. So, David, why don't we start with a background?
Yeah, sure. So, not life, my professional career as a physiotherapist, but then moved very quickly into strength and conditioning. And for the last probably 15 years, Roberto, I've been a performance director. So I've sort of led teams of sports science, strength and conditioning, recovery, sports medicine, psychology, and dietitian nutrition. So that's sort of been my career. And I've been lucky enough to work in Europe, in China, in the UK, and now back in Australia. So been very fortunate. And now most of my time is primarily working with organisations looking at sports strategy and how to get the most out of their athletes and their staff, and also into business as well. And I do a little bit of executive coaching along the way as well. So that's, I'm a proud husband and a very proud father of two good young kids as well.
Awesome. David, I would like to start with something about the evolution of sports performance over the years.
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess we're on the cusp of the technological and information revolution, aren't we? So I guess everything that we've seen leading up to the last, up to now, is going to largely be really supercharged by the amount of information that we can get and the insights that we get into our athletes. And that's going to fundamentally change the way we as practitioners work, because we're going to have not just more information than ever before about our athletes, but we're also going to be easily confused by all the amount of information that we've got as well, you know. I guess the other thing too that's really going to that we need to take into account is the rise in social media and the impact that has, both positively and negatively. So I guess positively, the information and social media has allowed us to connect, and it's allowed me to connect with lots of people around the world. But on a negative sense is that, it's much harder to concentrate if you're an athlete on your own performance, because you're now got a million critics all over the world. And so as performance professionals, we need to take that into account as well. The bedrocks of what we do as strength and conditioning coaches, as physiotherapists, as physiologists and everything is still going to be the same. The fundamentals are going to be there, but I think ultimately how we interact with each other, how we work in small teams to support the athlete is going to be one of the things that really changes as we move forward as well. It's certainly been something that I've seen change in the last 15 years. Has been less silos, so less just the sports medicine team doing one thing and the performance team doing another thing, and then the data team doing another thing. Everything is going to be blurred, and they're going to be, I think, a bunch of like Navy SEAL teams coming in and supporting the athlete all together. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a multidisciplinary approach, right?
Yeah, and probably even more than multidisciplinary, it's interdisciplinary, whereby we all have a little bit more understanding about what each other's do. So, the sports medicine professionals know more about performance than ever before, but the strength and conditioning team know more about nutrition and injury than ever before as well. And I guess when we've written our books, what we've tried to do is actually take that into account as well. So I think it's more than multidisciplinary; it's interdisciplinary.
Great, I like it. And given the fact, as you said, that nowadays we have so much information, and all the athletes are overwhelmed by all this information on social media, on the internet, and whatever. What's your recommendation for all the practitioners, and also for especially for young athletes?
So the recommendation is that just to have a critical mind. So rather than just believing everything that you hear, is to have a series of filters in your own mind about who it is that you're going to listen to, and not just how you listen to them, but how you actually synthesize that information and make it your own and make your own decisions. So rather than, going, wanting all the food to be ready, prepared, and chewed, so you just have to insert it into your stomach, you've actually got to do some work to crystallize it and to understand it with your own frameworks and your own lenses. So I think that now more than ever, Roberto, in every strain of life, we need critical thinking rather than just believing what everyone tells us, because what everyone tells us is not always going to be true, and what people tell us is going to be the way they see the world, and we need to see it through our own eyes and to curate the information that we get. I think that's probably the most important thing, and we see that around the world with fake news and alternative facts and all the different spins that media can put on it. We just need to be able to make up our own minds with critical appraisal. I think there's nothing more important.
Okay, David, I would like to spend some time also on talking about how you track performance now, how the performance tracking evolved over the years, and what is really important to you right now.
I guess a bit of it depends on the context and what it is that what sport it is, what level of athlete you're working with, and what it is that you're trying to achieve. Because sometimes performance, the easy thing to look at is wins and losses, right? Or gold medals. I think that's a bit too blunt, because it should be about performance versus expectation. So is Verona or is Sampdoria going to win the Serie A? Probably not now. But what's the level of expectation? What should they be doing with the basis of their resources and things like that? And so I think that's a really important way of looking at performance. If we're looking at individual athletes, again, it depends on the context, and it depends on the sport. So whether it is how far or how fast they're running, or goals scored, or whatever, it is just so dependent on what the sport needs. And I do a lot of work these days about helping sports really understand what it takes to win, what it really takes to be the best in the world at their sport. And that is just so different. So for example, triathlon, so 3 sports, swimming, cycling, running. We know that you are not going to win an Olympic medal in the triathlon, even though it's 3 different sports. We know that you're not going to be an Olympic medalist unless you are an elite runner. You have to be a world-class runner. And so when we track performance for that, we want to make sure that you are you're a good enough swimmer, that you are still in touch on the bike, but that you can really put the foot down in the run. And every sport has got that. Every sport has got what it takes to win. And that's a lot of the work that I do now is helping them understand that.
I like it. I love what you said before performance versus expectation. I hope a lot of GMs will listen to this. And
yeah. Well, so that's a really important point, isn't it? It's about aligning expectations as well. And everyone wants to be optimistic, and everyone wants to shoot for the top as well, which is great. We need that, but we also need a level of alignment about the expectations. So, what Watford have just sacked their manager. Claudio Ranieri is in there now. They have been through something like 11 managers in 4 years. And each one wants to promise that they're going to win the Premier League like Leicester did. It's not realistic. But if you sell the dream, you've got to live up to it, So that's one thing. So it's not just the GMs that have that view. It's the ego of us to say that we can deliver it as well.
For sure. I like it. And David, I'm a strength and conditioning coach for basketball teams by trade. And most of my listeners are young basketball strength coaches. So what would be your go-to test or battery of tests if you would work for a basketball team?
I'll have to think about that. And rather than just give a straight answer, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask a couple of questions. So I would want to know what style of game the coach wants to play. Because if the coach wants to play a full court press, we want to have a team that is much more able to have repeated sprint ability. So what tests that I would employ will very much depend on the tactics of the team, which will often depend on the players that you've got. So if you just want to set up and take 3-point shots, then I would be wanting to look at a battery of tests that maybe looked at peripheral vision and things like that. But if I wanted to get really close to the ring and play a full court press, I'd be wanting to look at power expression and aerobic endurance and repeat sprint ability. So I don't think there's one simple answer to that, I'm afraid. But as a broad brushstroke, I think having really good leg power is important, and not just on 2 leg, but on 1 leg. So I would use the isometric mid-thigh pull if I could, with a force plate, if you've got that available. I think that is just so helpful. I've used that all the time. And I guess the other thing too is some sort of running test, and probably a court test, whether that is a shuttle or something that's validated in basketball. They're probably the key things that come to mind. And sort of a counter movement jump type test as well. But again, it really does depend on what style of game that you and the coach are wanting to play and the athletes that you've got. Does that make sense? I'm keen. What would your answer be? What would your answer be?
Yeah, pretty similar to yours, especially because I really believe that constant communication between the performance staff and coaching staff is crucial to high performance sports.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So let's talk about communication a little bit. Tell me something about it, the importance of communication, and how do you get important information from genuine conversations with the coaching staff and also with the athletes?
The biggest mistake I hear with people talking about communication is to say that I told you so. I told you this information. But the reality is you haven't communicated it unless the other person has heard it and understood it. And sometimes that takes you a number of attempts to do it. It's not enough to say, Roberto, I told you this 2 weeks ago, or I sent you an email. That's not enough. There needs to be follow-up. And that is the thing which is time intensive, but it's the most important thing, because it's not what we say, it's what the other person hears. And as part of that is the understanding of that person and being able to see the world through their eyes as well. What is it that they, what's their perspective of things? Because the way you see things is different to the way I see things. So if I need to communicate to you, I need to get to your level. I need to sort of understand what are your challenges? How do you like being communicated to? That's if I want to do it effectively. And so there is a really big piece here about the importance of understanding each other within the team. So when I worked in China, I spent a lot of time, so I can't speak Mandarin, okay? So I spent a lot of time just drinking tea and beer with the coaches and just trying to develop this rapport and this empathy so they could tell that I was on their side. That's the most important thing. So that there is always that intention that, they know that whatever decision I make, even if we don't communicate perfectly because our languages are different, it is always done with the right intention. So that is the most important thing, is having that framework and being able to have empathy with who you're speaking to or communicating with, being able to see the world through their lenses and not thinking that just because you said something, does that mean that it has been understood? And that's why when I speak to people who don't speak English or even that don't understand the Australian accent, I always try and make sure that I speak slower, and I always pause and say, does that make sense? And I get them to repeat back to me. Often I'll get the people to repeat back to me what they've just heard so I can test to see if they've understood it or if I've not made myself clear. Frequently, it is not because the other person is not smart, it's because I've not communicated well. So there's a level of humility that I need to have to say, what can I do to communicate better? Not what do you need to do to be a better listener?
I love it. By the way, I love the Australian accent. One of my good friends is from Adelaide. I met him 2 years ago. He's a basketball coach. For the first 2 weeks, I didn't understand anything.
So the thing you need to know is that I'm from Sydney and we can't understand people from Adelaide either. So you're okay.
That's great. David, how do you go about creating good communication with the players? Because it's pretty easy when you have a basketball team. I mean, I just have 12 players, okay? But let's say you work with a soccer team or a rugby team or American football team. You have like 40 players, 30, 40 players. How do you do that?
So that's one of the great challenges, isn't it? It's not just thinking that the way you communicate is just one size fits all. Because if you've got a group of 40 people, I don't think you're going to have 40 different ways you need to communicate, but you're probably going to have 4 different ways. So there are going to be people that respond more to one style of communication, other groups to another style of communication. I don't necessarily agree that there are people that have so I think that different learning styles exists, okay? So there are some people that are more verbal, some people are more visual, all those sorts of things. I think that exists. But I don't think anyone is only verbal or only visual or only kinesthetic. What we do is we use all of those in different ways and at different times. So what I do is when I go into an organization is I get to know people and then just very briefly start to categorize the style of communication that these five people use, the style of communication that these 5 people use, and the style of communication that these 5 people use. And then I will tailor my style accordingly because I need to make sure that my message gets across. I can't afford for my message to only reach one of those 3 groups. But I don't need to ask 15 people if my message got across. I might just pick 1 or 2 from each of these groups to get them to repeat and get them to say, you know, did this message land with you? Does it make sense? And if it didn't, I might need to get to that group. I don't need to get to everyone again. But ultimately, I think what you're asking about lies at the heart of the difference between teaching and learning. And frequently as coaches, what we do is we try to teach and we come with a mindset of, I've got all this information, I've got to get it out of my head and into your brain, okay? But I prefer to think about it the other way and make sure that the environment and the people have got the right learning equipment and the right learning facilities and the right learning environment, because they're different. When it's the teacher, I'm putting me at the middle. But when it's the learner, I'm putting the learner at the middle. And they're very different mindsets. And so I think the same applies to communication. So it's not me as the speaker, it's you as the listener that I need to make sure that, you know, that's the strategy that I use anyway.
Just to go a little bit more into details, how do you learn their learning styles? Through like short conversations, with an interview?
Yeah, I mean, frequently these days I don't have the luxury of you know, going in and spending a lot of time and, you know, as going as deep as what you would like. Because if you do spend time with a team, like in your example, in your context, you get to know your players over a period of time, don't you? And you try things and I view that life is a series of experiments and you're always running experiments. Does this work? Does this work? You know, it's like being a chef. You're just trying to do a little bit more salt, a little bit more sugar, a little bit more vinegar, all those sorts of things. So if I don't have as much time, I will frequently, I'll go to, so if I was going to your team, I would ask you, I'd go, okay, tell me what's the, how do most people learn? How do they like to be communicated to? I don't need to start at ground zero. But equally, I would also go to the players and say, all right, tell me, do you understand me? Do you understand my accent? Do you understand where I'm coming from? Do you understand my point of view? And how do you like to be communicated to? So even if they don't give me the exact answer, I'm really hopeful that they then understand that at least I've given some thought to it and they know that I'm trying to meet them rather than saying, you've got to come to me. I'm going halfway or more than halfway to meet them. And I think that even that makes a massive difference. I hold the belief, Roberta, that 98% of the world's population are good people. And most people are trying to do the right thing. And if you can prove your value and prove that you are a good person and prove that you're wanting to help, people will meet you.
I love it. David, you're shifting your career now towards a leadership role. So I would like to know something about leadership. What is leadership for you, and what's your leadership style? You already spoke about some. You already
Yeah,
told us something about it, of course.
yeah, and I guess my answer is going to be somewhat similar, Roberto, in that I don't. So some people will write books and say this is my leadership style and this is the way I am. My view is that that is not a good way to be. So some people say I'm inspiring, or I'm a servant, or whatever it is. You know, there's all these different labels on social media about leadership styles. If I had to use one word, I would say adaptive. And the reason I say adaptive is because the leader that I need to be needs to be needs to change according to the context that I'm in and the people that I'm trying to lead. So let's take, for example, Winston Churchill. So certainly in the UK, US, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, he's held up as being one of the most inspirational leaders in the Second World War, and was a prime reason why the Allies were able to defeat Nazi Germany. Okay. What people forget is that Winston Churchill lost the leadership of his own party 6 months after the end of the World War. So he was a great leader at wartime, but not a great leader at peacetime, because he wasn't able to be adaptive. So what I try and do, and my leadership style, is understanding the environment that I'm in and the people that I'm trying to lead. If I'm trying to lead a bunch of really junior staff or a bunch of really junior athletes, I'm going to be one type of leader. But if I've got a staff that is very senior, if I've got a staff that, and a group of athletes that are very senior, I can't have the same approach. I need to be a different leader. The one that needs to change is me, which is why I think that I need to be an adaptive leader. Does that make sense? Does that resonate?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
And so it really is about me running experiments and understanding, being able to diagnose what the group needs, not the way I am, but what the group needs. And this is where, sorry to interrupt, but this is where leadership is really hard. And it's about being in service of others, not about what you believe are your trademarks.
Yeah, being adaptive is huge. It's very, very important. There is a book that I would like to recommend you. It's a short one. It's called The Coffee Bean. It says that you have to be like the coffee bean, ready to adapt to the environment. Like if you're a
Right.
coffee bean and you're in a glass of water, you adapt to the environment and you eventually change it.
Yeah, I like that idea. I really like that idea.
So, David, before talking about your new book, I would like to spend some time on again the main features that an athlete must have.
Well, I guess it probably goes back to the question you asked about what tests that we need, because it really does depend on the sport. But what I think is really important, before we get down into the granular detail, what I think is really important is all athletes need to have a purpose about why they're doing something. They need to have a really strong sense of identity, which is very important, because if they don't, if all they know is them as a basketballer, or you as even staff, if you are solely a basketball S&C coach, if that gets taken away from you, then you crumble. And we've all seen athletes that don't do well when they retire from their sport, because all they've got about themselves is them as the athlete. So I think that's really important, is to have different facets of your life. I think it is super important to have a really strong grounding of mental skills, attention, focus, professional behaviours, these sorts of things, as well as your physical performance. And I guess as an S&C coach, what we tend to do is we think about the physical performance, the strength, which I think is fundamental. That's the currency, our endurance, our flexibility, those sorts of things. They're the building blocks of physical performance. But ultimately, that won't work unless you've got all the other things. And the best strength and conditioning coaches are the ones that understand the totality of performance. So I don't think there is any one perfect athlete, because it really does depend on the sport. But if we were to collect all the great athletes, they would have amazing attention to detail. They would have amazing performance behaviours. They've got an ability to be cognitively flexible when they need to. If something doesn't go their way, they can get over it and move on, as well as their natural talent and their physical gifts as well. I think that's really important.
Great. Doing my researches for this episode, I listened to another podcast with you, and you said that you want athletes that are inquisitive, and that really stuck to my mind. I loved it.
Yeah, I think that's really important, because what I want them to do is not just to be passive recipients of knowledge. I don't want them just to say, David, tell me what to do. I want them to challenge. I want them to go out and seek information and then bring it back, and to really, and that's being inquisitive about knowledge, but it's also being inquisitive about what's their potential. What could they do if they really spend a lot of time on their prehab, or spend a lot of time on their push strength, or spend, whatever it is, or looked out of their box and practice juggling, or think whatever it is, does that improve their overall performance? And I think that's really important. So the three words are an inquisitive, a discovery mindset, and curious. They're the three things that I really value.
Great. All right, David, let's switch gears and let's talk about your book, the second edition of High Performance Training for Sports. I got the first edition right here. It's always on my table. I'm looking forward to receiving the second one. I ordered it the other day. So first of all, what are the main differences from the first edition?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. So when the publishers came to us and said, "Oh, will you do another edition?" Because it was phenomenally successful. The first book was really, really successful, and I think it's in 7 or 8 languages and sold really well around the world. And so we were thinking, oh well, maybe we just leave it, But we think that there is actually something valuable in updating it. And when the publishers came to us and said, "Oh, will you do another version?" What we didn't want to do was just change a little bit and put a new cover on it and change the odd word. What we really wanted to do was make sure that if you bought the first one, so in your example, Roberto, if you bought the first one, there was a a strong value proposition for you to buy the second one, because that's honoring, the money that you've spent on it. So we set about understanding what it was that worked really well, what didn't work quite so well in the first one, and what do we want to incorporate in the second. And the reality is most second editions are about 30% different, give or take. Our second edition is about 80% different. There are 16 new chapters. There are 35 new contributors. And we've really taken a lot of time to look at, so the fundamentals are still there. Strong, fit, flexible, all those things are still there. Really, really, really strong chapters for us. But we've also taken the view that we wanted something on mental performance. We wanted things on coaching and cueing. So we got Nick Winkelman, probably the world expert in this area, to talk about that. We got Brett Bartholomew to talk about influence and negotiation and identity. We got Professor Sam Robertson and Dr. Jackie Chan to talk about setting up learning environments. We got Stu McGill and JB Marin to talk about speed training and how we integrate that into sports. So we really wanted to think about all the things that go into a performance, not just the X's and O's, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. David, what is the process of putting together such a book? And I'm really curious to know, how do you choose the authors?
Yeah, wow. It's a labor of love, I can tell you that much. It's not something that people should do once lightly, let alone twice. So you need to think very, very carefully about it. But it is something that we're really proud of, like super, super proud of it. Initially, what I wanted to do was have an alternative to the textbooks that are out there. And the textbooks that are out there are fantastic, but they tend to be very research heavy. Whereas what we wanted to do was say, if you had Stu McMillan and JB Marin come in to talk to your organization or talk to you about speed, what would they say? Two of the world's greatest speed coaches, what would they say? And we wanted them to write in their voice about speed. So my co-editor, Dan, and myself, we've been in this space for over 20 years, and we're lucky enough that we know a lot of people. And so what we wanted to know was, when it comes to this particular area, who would we want to hear from? And we're lucky enough that a lot of these people we know already, or we knew already. And in the event that we didn't know someone, we knew someone that knew them. So we got an introduction that way. But what we were really committed to doing was getting the absolute best in the world, or some of the best in the world, to write for this. And we were certainly very lucky, Roberto, in that the first one did really well. And so when it comes to getting the second edition, it was even easier because everyone wanted to be involved. So it was that. And then I guess from there is about agreeing with the contributor about what it is that we want them to write about and how we want them to write. Because it's one thing being an expert in a field, it's another thing being able to write about it, because they're quite different skill sets, obviously. And so there was a lot of work there, and then they would submit a draft, and then we would have to edit it and send it back and say, we want you to talk about this and that and the other, but we want you to use this tone of voice. And, it's a project, isn't it? And so, the reality is we've been working on this for 3 years, and it's just been released. So it's certainly not an undertaking that you enter into lightly. But as I say, it's one that we're really proud of.
What did you learn from putting the new edition together, David?
Well, so I learned so much from every single author. There was no chapter, and so there's 27 chapters. There's no chapter in there where I didn't go, wow, that's really changed the way I do things. But in terms of writing a book, like I've talked about this a little bit on another podcast, but the chapter by Nick Winkelman about language and coaching and cueing is just exceptional. It is so, so, so good, because what he has done is written it almost as a story rather than, literature. This person said this in 2012, this person said this in 2018. He writes a story like a narrative. And by the end of it, like, it's a real page turner. You want to read it. And by the end of it, you go, wow, what a great story. And I've learned things. So I out of that, I learned not just about coaching and cueing, but I also learned that it's possible to write a textbook in that style. And that, I mean, every chapter is great. So I can't pick out one chapter as being better than another. But I did want to highlight Matt Jordan. So Matt Jordan is the senior performance lead at Canadian Sports Institute. And he has just written a magnificent chapter about movement efficiency and the importance of being strong through range, because it's not just, so we're often taught about, just doing the things that you need to do for your sport. But he talks a lot about being strong and being efficient to get yourself out of trouble if you get into trouble. And he works with downhill skiers, and that's a high speed sport. And having the competencies and the efficiency to be able to perform, but also get yourself out of trouble if you find yourself there. And that's another magnificent chapter. So, but just to answer your question, there is just, every single chapter has got little nuggets. And I guess that's the other thing we tried to do, was in every chapter I isolated probably 5 or 6 wise ways, we call them. And then at the end of every chapter is having some non-negotiables. If Nick Winkelman was to come in and give you some 5 non-negotiables about coaching and cueing, these are the things that he says you have to get right. If Rhett Larson comes in and talks about warm-ups, these are the things you need to get right. If Martin Boucher and Paul Larson come in to talk about aerobic conditioning, these are the things you need to get right. Non-negotiables. And so hopefully we've been able to draw that distinction for every leader as well, every reader as well. So when they finish that chapter, there are actionable insights, like they can apply things tomorrow, not just, I now need to go and do a whole heap more research.
Well, awesome. I really can't wait to read it. David, is there anything else you want to add on what to expect from this new edition?
No, only other than to say one of the highlights for me, at least, is when people buy it and take a photo of them with it and put it on social media, Insta or Twitter or LinkedIn or whatever. And the thing is, so books don't make you rich. Like this has not made us rich at all, but it does give us a really warm feeling inside to when people find use out of it, and so that we can have conversations like the conversation that you and I are having now. It's been the best thing about this book is getting to meet people and seeing the value that it creates. So that's my only ask of listeners, other than going and getting the book, is to interact and post and share and the like. That's the best thing about it, because we're all trying to solve the same thing, really. We're all trying to have amazing things happen with our athletes so that we can watch it on TV or in the stadiums, and it makes us feel good about being human. And that's what we're trying to do.
All right. David, before wrapping up this episode, we usually finish off with 3 rapid fire questions.
Go for it.
All right. So for everyone, your favorite sport?
My favourite sport. So I grew up playing Australian rules football. So I love Australian rules football, but many of your listeners may not know know anything about it. So get onto YouTube. It's the biggest sport in Australia. It's like Australia's NFL. It's unlike any sport you'll ever see, and it's what that's what I've spent a lot of my career in, and that's what I grew up with. So I guess that's my answer.
It's definitely tougher than NFL. Your favorite book besides yours, of course.
My favorite book. My favorite non-fiction book is Don Quixote. My favorite fiction book is Don Quixote. My favorite non-fiction book. Interesting question. I don't know about my favorite. My favorite in the last 12 months is one called The Good Ancestor. And that is all about long-term thinking in a short-term world. So I think that, yeah, they're two examples, but, I am a reader. I read a lot. So it's hard to pick them, but I guess that'd be the ones that readily spring to mind.
Right. Last one. After releasing the new book, what's in the pipeline now for you?
There's a lot of talking about the new book, which is great, and having conversations like this, which is what I love doing. And my day-to-day is helping organizations make good decisions and helping people make good decisions, whether that's in their career or whether that is as a leader and those sorts of things. So I guess that's the next bit is making sure that really flourishes. But trying to create the environment that my kids grow up really well in, and continuing to have adventures. Like I love adventures and being able to do that. And we've just emerged from 5 months of lockdown here. And I know that in Italy, stranger to that. So it's been hard for us, and being able to see friends and family is almost new for us again. So I'm really looking forward in the next month or two to be able to see friends and family and have a haircut and doing all the things that we should be able to do in a free society. So really looking forward to that.
All right. David, thank you very much. Thanks for taking the time today. It was a great episode. Where can my listeners find more about you?
Probably the easiest places at the moment, I guess, Roberto, is Twitter at David G Joyce and LinkedIn. And that. So if you write David Joyce and sport, I'm sure I will come up. And I guess they're the easiest ways, and people can drop me a message and I'll get back to them and the like. So that's probably the best pipes, I suppose.
All right. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you, Roberto. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope the listeners have got something out of it as well.